The math in this game is utterly absurd. Well, how are you guys doing today? I think it's high time we talked about it. That's right. We're going to delve into the most hated thing to come out of D&D since the Williams Girls. 4th edition. I must tell you, I've always chafed a little bit when I hear people say how bad 4th edition is. It's not that they're necessarily wrong, but I'm not sure they fully understand why they're correct either, in a lot of cases. Hell, I'm convinced that most of the people saying that never even played this game, or maybe just played it once and saw how different it was from earlier versions and then just noped out. Which is fine, but it also doesn't warrant the red-hot hatred that it seems to engender in many. I think a lot of this may also be due to peer pressure, almost like it's going against party dogma to admit that this game, as fatally flawed as it is, does have a couple of virtues. Well, how do I know that? First off, I guess my bona fides, I played basic and 1st edition of D&D, but sporadically back in the 1980s. In 1991, I started running weekly games, continuing all the way up to present day. First in 2nd edition, then we switched to 3rd edition in 2000. Played that till about 2009 when we switched to 4E. And I think we stopped playing 4E in about 2012 maybe. And after that it was a little Hackmaster, a little Pathfinder, some 5E, before we finally ended up where we are now, which is Castles and Crusades, where we are mostly happy, I think. One of the accusations leveled at 4th edition is that it isn't really D&D. Is that correct? Well, I'll let you know my answer to that towards the end of this video, so stick around, would you? I think what I'll do, because I'm filming this at Christmas time, is put everything right and everything wrong with this game on a naughty and nice list. So without further ado, let's get into it. 4E is fun. Up to a point. It's a fun combat miniatures game. If you want a game that gives your character oodles of things to do and powers to unleash in combat, this might be the game for you. Combat was very fluid, with the players generally involved mentally and thinking about how they could use their various spells and powers. This game was made for hack and slash players and DMs, to an undeniable fault. Everyone compares it, of course, to the huge MMORPG games of the time, like World of Warcraft. And it's indisputable that there is a lineage there. So if that's the experience you want at the table, combat first, combat second, and maybe some light dungeon exploring third, this could be your jam. However, the math in this game is utterly absurd. If you thought you saw bad inflation under Joe Biden, wait until you see some of the numbers in this game. Armor classes in the 40s and 50s, attack bonuses of plus 27, ability scores going all the way up to 25. It's like when an American visits Japan and exchanges all of his dollars for yen and thinks his 100,000 yen is a lot of money, but finds out it can only buy one pair of panties from those weird vending machines. You soon realize that your up-jumped attack bonuses in this game as a player are really not that impressive when you're rolling against defensive scores that are higher than my age. Stop laughing. As inflated as the scores are in this game, it oddly manages to stay balanced, more or less throughout. As I mentioned, we played this game for a few years, and it just happened to coincide with an event in my Birthright campaign that made the martial aspect of 4E not too bad for us. It was a time when the Anurian Empire was at war with the Red Kings of Aftane. The PCs were mostly soldiers, scouts, and commanders in this particular campaign. We actually had some really cool combats, especially at mid-levels, because once you get to higher levels, the complexity of this game really starts to drag things to a crawl. At higher levels, it would take most of a whole session for a large battle. I mean, it got crazy complex. The pressure on the DM was significant due to the math involved in this game. I'm not lying when I say that at a certain point, using a calculator was not off the table. If I wasn't an accountant, I'd probably have needed one myself. The reason it was particularly hard for DMs in 4E with larger battles was actually something, though, that could be a benefit in smaller battles. And that was the fact that this game gave you different statted versions of the standard monsters you'd find in normal D&D. You could have rank and file orcs from low-level minions all the way up to, mid to high-level leaders to challenge the PCs without just kind of upping the numbers, which you would normally do. And speaking of levels, the PC levels are standardized in 4th edition, which I do not like. They're also set up to take advantage of the video game dopamine effect. You can get all the way up to 5th level with just 5,500 experience points, I think, in 4E. One combat was usually enough to get some of the party up, which I think was the point. They wanted you to keep fighting and keep grinding instead of looting that dungeon stealthily. Again, leaning into the MMORPG aspect. It does give a false sense of accomplishment, but for how long some of these fights ended up taking, I'm sure the PCs felt they probably deserved the reward. You could go all the way up to level 30 in this game, and unlike in previous versions, I think getting up that high and keeping things balanced was actually a realistic proposition, but the lower levels flew by, before they did start to slow down a tad. In the milieu of this game's rules, there was one class that was actually kind of interesting. It was the Warlord, which you might think was just an expert fighter, but was actually pretty well placed as a battlefield commander in this system. He essentially went around and gave everyone buffs, often being better at the back than the front. When you can sometimes fall into the, all hands on deck trap with, anyone in the party that can swing a sword needing to jump in, this was actually a little intriguing. It did, of course, lean very, very heavily again into the MMORPG aspect of the game by just kind of being a backline buff dealer. And one thing that started in 4E that still plagues the game into 5E and beyond is cheap healing. This game incorporated the healing surge as a fundamental necessity. These actions allowed the PCs to very easily heal damage up on the fly in the middle of combat with no effort and certainly no cleric. And while the picture of a cleric sneaking around the battlefield so he can touch his cohorts and impart his healing spell has always rang a tad silly to me, the notion of just wishing the damage away is even worse. These healing surges, of course, live on with the short and long rest mechanics adopted by many games, including 5e. These mechanics de-emphasize the cleric and paladin, and they encourage dangerous, sometimes reckless combat. But that is actually a feature in this game, not a bug. I did like a few other minor concepts in 4e. If you're running a combat-heavy game, the one hit point minion is not a bad add-in. If you want to pile up bodies like Conan and that Frazetta picture, this is one way to do that, without it taking all night. 4th edition, like both 3E and 5E, was a skill-based game. And it was the first D&D game that included a mechanic for skill challenges, needing multiple successes, perhaps from multiple characters, in order to accomplish a task. And I remember that mechanic creating a couple of memorable moments for us, and I'm sure it did likewise for other players. But the real Achilles heel of this game is that combat just became untenable after a while. Not for the same reason it became unworkable in 5e, where PCs essentially became unstoppable at about 6th level. No, 4e was frustrating because combats simply became too complex at higher levels. It wasn't because the monsters didn't have a chance, but it was just because the DM just had too much stuff to worry about. Too much math to do, too much stuff to track. It started to overload the old system after a bit. A few other things I didn't like in 4e was the fact that there wasn't any iconic adventure for this game. They did the almost mandatory conversion of Ravenloft for it, and that was okay, but nothing special. But aside from that, there's really no legacy of a good 4E adventure. Part of the reason is the license. Folks think this past January was the first time Wizards of the Coast tried to mess with the open gaming license, but they changed the license for 4th edition, making it much more restrictive. That led a lot of third-party companies that supported 3rd edition to simply jump ship. And in the case of Paizo, realized that they could just repackage 3rd edition to a population of gamers who were already nostalgic for it. You also started seeing the OSR movement getting some steam during this time. 4th edition made people realize that there was some value in simplicity. For all of you gatekeeping is good folks, might I present your star pupil. I always found it amusing that Mike Merles, who recently got let go from Wizards of the Coast, was on the design team for 4th edition, the most math-heavy version of D&D ever created. Yet he had the absolute gall to make this tweet, virtue signaling about using, you guessed it, rule complexity and math to gatekeep women. I guess Wizards of the Coast finally took this tweet to heart, Mike. Revenge is a dish best served ice cold. So in conclusion, is 4th edition D&D? Well, not really. It's a miniatures combat game where dungeon delving and the traditional aspects of D&D are very much deprioritized. Now, if all you do is combat, this game isn't bad up to a point, but it just becomes so clunky after a while. It probably also encourages the worst aspects of your players, like wanting to feel rewarded after every single combat, like Pavlov's dog. But I do feel oddly protective of it at times. Partially because I just hate it when people reflexively call it the worst thing ever created without having actually played in the system. That thing of, I can call it bad because I actually played this damn thing for more than one session. Now look, if you're in the category that 4E was just not for you, the math just kind of looked insane and it really didn't seem like D&D in your book, but, whatever. Of course, I respect that. And I will say, look, if you have a good group, you can have a good time with this game. We had a couple of epic battles and some great memories. I even managed to put some decent dungeon crawls inside of it, despite the fact that the rules don't really help you out much there. So no, 4E is not D&D. But guess what? Here's your M. Night Shyamalan twist. Neither is the shit that 5E is. I don't care how successful it is. 5E is a broken game that keeps some of the worst elements of 4E, like healing surges, in the form of the full heal 8-hour power nap. Just lost 87 hit points? No worries, find a tree to sleep under and a bottle of NyQuil, and you're going to wake up fresh as a daisy, ready to recklessly wade into combat once more. Ridiculous. And 4E didn't have stuff any worse than, say, 5E's Sculpt spell, where a wizard can have the group bum rush a villain while he slings a fireball into the melee and the friendlies get to pass their saves automatically. How nice. At 6th level, any DM will tell you that if you have a group of about 6 experienced players in 5e, they turn into complete superheroes that just can't be killed without resorting to save or die tactics or biblical swarms of villains. And the level advancement is just as bad in 5e as it was in 4e. Hell, they sell relatively thin campaign books for 5e that promise you going from levels 1 to 10. Something that used to take, years in earlier versions is just a couple of months in 5e. So tell me how that is any better than 5e. It's not. So yeah, if you're going to dump on 4e for not being D&D, in my opinion, you got to throw 5e in there as well. But look, that's just me. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences with the 4e system. Did you get anything out of it? I have a feeling there's a market for this type of kind of heroic, butt-kicking fantasy game. In fact, you can just look at the MCDM Kickstarter for their game as proof. Matt Colville is an open fan of 4e, and I think you'll see the DNA of this game hidden in that one, when it comes out in about 5 years. Anyway, that's all. I hope you join us every Wednesday for our live stream, The Lair. Usually at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk to interesting people, go over news of the week, kibitz a little, poke fun. We actually even do some live play towards the end as well, and we would love to see you there. So you guys have a great, great day, and until we talk again, goodbye. Crud Forge makes two great games that aren't afraid to poke a little fun at the people who, quite frankly, need a little fun poked at them. First is the quick and hilarious Virtue Signal, the game where you play a social justice warrior trying to attract followers to your cause before the other players can tear you down. Then there's the mammoth Portland Occupied Zone, or POZ. In this strategy game, you play as a complete disaster of a human being, trying to reshape Portland into a slacker Marxist utopia. Bring a few friends and warm up that throwing arm for some Molotov cocktails. Folks at Power Up Paradise are taking care of you with both a protective phone case and, when you flip it over, an ingenious Gameboy, which is built right into it. Go back to the golden age of video gaming and play dozens of challenging games that will delight and frustrate you in a good way. Mobile games are almost universally terrible, so why not take a step back when they did it right?
What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody.